The smell of antiseptic had always haunted me. Even after all these years, just walking past a hospital made my chest tighten and my palms dampen. It wasn't fear exactly, it was memory. A memory of pain, of silence, of lying in a bed surrounded by machines that beeped louder than my heartbeat. I had promised myself I'd never go back to that world. But life, as it often does, had other plans. It all began 12 years ago, when I was 26 and reckless. I was working construction in a small town outside Denver, taking every overtime shift I could find to save for a business I never actually started. I'd always been the type who thought bad things only happened to other people. That changed one gray afternoon when a scaffolding collapsed beneath me. I fell 20 feet. The next thing I remember was waking up to the hum of fluorescent lights and a voice saying softly, "You're going to be okay, just stay still." Her name was Nora Valdez, a young nurse then, probably no older than 30. She had dark, tired eyes that still managed to smile, and a voice that could calm a storm. I was a mess of pain and frustration, but somehow, she never lost her patience with me. When I couldn't move, she helped me eat. When I couldn't speak from the pain, she told stories about her childhood on a farm, about her brother who played guitar, about her dream of seeing the ocean one day. She brought light into that cold, white room. I was in the hospital for nearly 2 months. I never saw her as anything but a nurse doing her job, but something about her presence stayed with me long after I was discharged. She made me feel human when I felt broken. When I left, I tried to thank her, but she was off shift. I wrote her a note, "You helped me remember what hope feels like. Thank you." I never knew if she got it. Life moved on. I recovered, changed jobs, and eventually opened a small repair shop. But something inside me stayed quiet, as if a part of me was still lying in that bed, listening to Nora's stories. A decade passed before I saw her again. It was a bright spring morning, one of those days that feels almost too perfect to be real. I was at a local park for a free community checkup event. My blood pressure had been acting up, and though I wasn't one for doctors, my sister had dragged me there. The nurses were rotating between patients, taking vitals and chatting kindly with the crowd. I didn't notice her at first. I just remember hearing that voice again, soft, calm, patient. I turned my head, and for a moment, time folded back on itself. There she was, older now, her hair streaked with silver, her face carrying gentle lines of age, but unmistakably her. Nora, she was leaning over an elderly woman, helping her with a blood pressure cuff. I waited until she turned, and when her eyes met mine, something flickered: confusion, then recognition, and then that same warm smile I hadn't seen in 12 years. "Ethan," she said slowly, as if she didn't quite believe it. I nodded, and before I could even speak, she laughed, a laugh full of surprise and nostalgia. "You were my favorite patient." The words hit me like sunlight breaking through clouds. We sat on a bench after her shift ended, talking like old friends. She remembered everything: my stubbornness, my fear of needles, even the way I'd joke about escaping the hospital food. She told me she'd found my note years later, tucked behind some old charts when she was moving departments. "It made me cry," she said softly. "You were one of the few patients who reminded me why I chose this job." Her honesty broke something open inside me. I told her how that accident had changed me, not just physically, but emotionally. How her kindness had carried me through the worst days without her ever knowing it. She smiled, her eyes glistening. "You know, sometimes I used to wonder what happened to all my patients after they left. Most people forget nurses once they're better. I'm glad you didn't." We sat in silence for a while, watching children play nearby. She mentioned that she now worked part-time, balancing her nursing with taking care of her husband, who had been battling early-onset Parkinson's. Her voice wavered slightly when she spoke about him, but she carried no bitterness, just quiet acceptance. Something about her resilience humbled me. I had spent years angry at life for a single accident, while she'd spent decades helping others through theirs. Over the next few weeks, we began meeting for coffee on weekends. She'd bring photos of her husband, Luis, smiling in the garden, and I'd tell her about the shop I ran now, fixing things for people who couldn't afford new ones. We joked that we were both in the business of repair. She fixed people, I fixed things, but behind her steady demeanor, I noticed something: fatigue. Her hands trembled slightly when she lifted her cup, and sometimes she'd lose her train of thought mid-sentence. One afternoon, I finally asked if she was okay. She hesitated, then admitted she'd been diagnosed with an autoimmune condition that drained her energy. It's nothing dramatic, she said with a small smile, just life reminding me to slow down. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking of how many lives she'd touched, how many people she'd healed without anyone ever knowing her own struggles. I wanted to do something, anything, to give a little back. So I started volunteering at her clinic on weekends, repairing broken wheelchairs, fixing loose cabinet doors, even repainting the walls of the break room. The staff called me Nora's handyman. She'd laugh every time she heard it. Guess I finally get to be the patient, she'd tease, but there was one afternoon that changed everything. It was late summer, the sun pouring through the clinic windows as she finished up her paperwork. She looked weaker than usual, her breath short. I offered to drive her home, and she didn't protest. On the way, she told me about her dream, something she'd never done, something she'd always talked about back when I was her patient. I still haven't seen the ocean, she whispered. That stuck with me. A week later, I arranged a short trip to the coast, nothing extravagant, just a quiet weekend by the sea. I told her it was my way of saying thank you for everything she'd done for me, for everyone. She tried to refuse at first, but when I showed her the tickets, she smiled through tears. You always were stubborn, she said. The day we arrived at the beach, she stood barefoot in the sand, staring at the horizon as if it held every answer she'd ever sought. The wind tangled her hair, and the sunlight caught the moisture in her eyes. It's more beautiful than I imagined, she whispered. You know, sometimes I used to pray that one of my patients would live a full life, something worth remembering. Seeing you now. I think that prayer was answered. I didn't know what to say. I just stood beside her, listening to the waves and realizing how people can drift in and out of your life, only to return when you need them most. A few months later, I got a call from her husband, Luis. His voice was quiet. Nora had passed away peacefully in her sleep. He said she had written me a letter before she died. I sat there for hours, holding that letter, tears soaking the paper. For a long time, I didn't know what to do with the grief. But eventually, I did what she would have wanted. I started a small foundation, the Nora Project, that helped provide free medical supplies to rural clinics. I even hung her photo in my shop, right above the counter, where everyone could see it. Sometimes customers would ask who she was, and I'd tell them, she's the reason I believe in kindness. Years have passed since then, but every time I see a nurse in scrubs, every time I smell that faint scent of antiseptic, I smile instead of shuddering. Because now, that smell means healing, not hurt. It means someone like Nora is out there, quietly changing lives, one patient at a time.